Hey, Dan Brown here, the Frank Kern fan, and I'm coming at you from danbrown.tv, and in this video we're going to do a part 1 of the Mass Control sales letter breakdown here. We're going to go through it, read it together. This was one of the most famous promotions in internet marketing community history, so I think it's only right that we take a pretty in-depth look at it over the course of a few videos. So we're going to do this in bite-sized chunks. I'm not going to overwhelm you, but let's dive in. So you can see at the top here, they call it mass control. So that basically draws the reader in, creates curiosity, and people are thinking, what is this? And then you could see the next part of it, kind of the sub-headline, but it's more like a graphic. This is just building the authority, the credibility for Frank, for the company launching this product, which is Frank Kern, obviously. So, he talks about some of his past launches and things like that and the figures behind those launches. Then he goes in, oops, I just minimized it. Let me go back in here. So then he goes in to say, this money-getting system has been proven 4 times in a row, which he showed above. He showed the actual figures, bringing in over $23.8 million in just under 24 hours. So pretty crazy headline, makes you think like, what is this? It basically draws you in, huge benefit there, and makes you read into the subheadline, which is, here's the true story of what really happened, how this proven system works, and how you could put it to work for you. So there's a couple things working in there. Firstly, he says, here's a true story of what really happened. So it's framed as a story here, which we know Frank is really big on delivering your message packaged inside a story. It's what we're conditioned to hear since we're about, knee high. We've been raised hearing stories. So it basically tunes the reader in, and then he has how this proven system works. So how it works, which, people like being given the fish, but the old expression, if you could teach a man to fish, he could eat forever. So I don't think that's the exact expression, but that's the gist of it. And then the last part of that is how you can put it to work for you. So benefit based, basically insinuating that you could make $23.8 million in under 24 hours. So then, it basically draws you in. He starts off with dear friend, which is, he's establishing a friendship here and introducing it like it's a real letter that you were to receive. So he says, you're about to go deep inside the sometimes twisted world of the biggest launches in internet marketing history. And listen, this is the real story, the true story that only I can tell you because I'm the guy that made it all happen. Warning, this story gets ugly, so a little typo there. Things get hairy and people get weird when millions of dollars start flying in, especially when it's $23.8 million in under 24 hours. Actually, it's a lot more. That's just a rough total of the orders that came in during the first 24-hour periods during the launches I'm going to tell you about. But before we go further, we need to set the record straight. We're only at the beginning of this letter, and you've already seen some really big numbers. And if I were you, I'd be wondering, is this a bunch of hype? So let me just stop here and tell you what's going on here at the beginning. So at the top here under Dear Friend, he tells you, he kind of manages your expectations. He's showing you what you're going to get, and he's using a tactic by telling you it's a twisted world, and that works because you're thinking like, wow, it's weird, it's bizarre, like what is this? I want to know how this is going on. And the biggest launches in internet marketing history, so obviously that's got a little benefit going there. And then he frames it again as a story, and that he is the guy who made it all happen. So he's building his authority, his celebrity status here. That's what he's doing. And then the same kind of thing here. He's using the shock factor at the beginning of the warning sentence, and then things get hairy and people get weird when millions of dollars start flying in. So that is basically just, benefit based. And then what I wanted to bring to your attention was, look at the first heading here. So $23.8 million in under 24 hours, huge benefit based. And then look at the second one. Is this a bunch of hype? So you're going to notice as we go through these that his headlines actually fit together. So you could read just the headlines and get the gist of it, and then basically it's designed so that people could go back and read through the sections that they want. So if you see $23.8 million in under 24 hours, you're thinking like, that is crazy. Is that even possible? So, which is why he would address secondly in his next headline, is this a bunch of hype, right? So let's keep going through here. He goes, and you're absolutely right to ask that question. Look, if I wasn't the guy who wrote the launch copy, wrote the sales letter, and saw it all happen with my own two eyes, there's no way I'd believe it was true. In other words, I know how you feel. So let me put your mind at ease by pulling back the curtain right now and showing you exactly what happened. You'll hear about the amazing successes, the near fatal mistakes, and everything in between. For the first time ever, here's the backstory behind the biggest launches in the history of internet marketing. So he's drawing you into his story. He's building the legend of Frank Kern, and he is basically roping you into hearing the story of how these huge launches went down. And also at the beginning of this, after he asks, is this a bunch of hype? He says, you're absolutely right to ask that question. He's identifying, he's associating with the prospect. And then he's saying, if he wasn't the guy who engineered all of these campaigns, right, and saw it happen for himself, he wouldn't believe it. So he's saying, I'm like you. I don't believe in the hype. I think these numbers are actually very hypey, but he's addressing that and coming out and saying, yeah, I think this is hypey, but if I wasn't the guy who did all of this, then I would think the same thing. But let me show you how I did this. So he's revealing kind of the legend of the mass control system, and he is addressing the skepticism that the audience is most likely feeling right now. So we're going to do just a little more in this video. We're going to do one or two more headlines. So let's see what we got here. So after he says, here's the backstory behind the biggest launches in internet marketing history, or history of internet marketing, he says, I know you've heard other people hint at this story before, and some unqualified bozos even try and take credit for it. So right now I'm going to break it all down for you and show you what really happened, who was involved, and how much money was really made. Let's begin. First of all, only $1 million of that money was mine. The rest of it came from 3 different product launches I wrote and orchestrated for other people. Sure, I got royalties and they add up to a bunch of money too, but in terms of my own stuff, it was only a small launch that brought in $1 million for me personally. It all started back in late 2005 when I released a very limited workshop called Serializer, and some of you may actually remember the Serializer launch. So let's get back into it. It cost $10,000 per person, and it was the first thing I'd sold to the marketing crowd in over a year. Up until this point, this whole mass control thing was just a theory I'd been kicking around in my head. I had no clue if this launch would work or if it would bomb. So what is he doing here in this part? See, at the beginning here, he's basically saying that he's addressing the other gurus, so-called gurus in the space, and he's kind of positioning himself against it. He's calling them unqualified bozos, which is pretty entertaining. And he says, listen, screw all that. Let me break it down for you and show you what really happened, how it's really done. So he addresses the issue that not all of that money was his, which is kind of just showing the prospect that you're honest, you care, you're not taking credit for that, you're not trying to be hypey, you're just saying, look, these are the numbers, right? Some of these are my clients' numbers, some of these are my income. So then he goes into his own launch back in 2005, which he's talking about, Serializer launch, and he says it cost $10,000, first thing he'd sold to the marketing crowd in a year. So that kind of implies that he's making good enough money to take a year off from releasing products. And then he goes on to say, up until this point, the whole mass control thing was just a theory that he'd been kicking around his head, which is huge. I want to bring that to your attention because what he's doing here is he's kind of showing the audience that this is something he kind of stumbled on, that he wasn't sure if it would work. He didn't know how powerful it was. He just stumbled on it, which people like to know that, and you're going to notice that as a recurring theme in a lot of successful promotions because people feel like getting rich is luck. It's a lot of luck. So when they see somebody else who got lucky, they think, oh yeah, maybe I could get lucky as well. Like this person gets lucky. That's how you get rich. And people just think that, so that's what they go with. And I'm going to end the video here because I think, this is a lot of information to digest, and stay tuned for part 2 of the Mass Control sales letter promos. Dan Brown from danbrown.tv. Have a great day.